They say money makes history, but some men make so much of it that history itself bends around their name. Long before the age of billionaires, oil barons, and Wall Street magnates, there was one man whose fortune defied imagination. His name was Mansa Musa, the king of kings of Mali, the emperor of gold, and the richest human being who ever lived. His story is not just about wealth. It's about power, civilization, and how fortune can build or unbalance entire worlds. To understand Mansa Musa, we must go back to the early 14th century, a time when Europe was sinking into poverty after the Crusades. Asia was still recovering from Mongol invasions, and Africa, quietly, brilliantly, was thriving in its own golden age. At the heart of West Africa, stretching across what is now Mali, Senegal, and Niger, lay the Mali Empire, one of the greatest civilizations in medieval history. It was vast, stable, and unbelievably rich in one thing the world could never get enough of: gold. Gold wasn't just a metal. It was the fuel of medieval economies, the measure of wealth, and the foundation of global trade. And Mali sat right on top of it. The empire controlled major gold mines at Bambouk and Wangara, and dominated the Saharan trade routes connecting Africa with the Middle East and Europe. Every grain of salt and every ounce of gold that crossed those deserts paid tribute to the throne in Niani, the capital of Mali and the seat of Mansa Musa. Musa wasn't born into power. He rose through a line of rulers who had already made Mali prosperous. His predecessor, Abu Bakr II, reportedly sailed into the Atlantic with hundreds of ships searching for the edge of the world and never returned. When he vanished, Musa became the ruler. It was around 1312 AD, and he inherited an empire already glowing with gold and trade. But what Musa did next transformed Mali from a regional power into a legend that still echoes 7 centuries later. Mansa Musa was not just a king. He was a visionary leader who combined faith, intellect, and wealth in equal measure. He was a devout Muslim, ruling in a time when Islam connected vast regions from Spain to India. His reign brought Mali not only riches but knowledge, architecture, and education. Yet the event that would immortalize his name came in the year 1324, his pilgrimage to Mecca. The Hajj, as it's called in Islam, is a spiritual journey every Muslim strives to make at least once. But when Mansa Musa decided to go, it wasn't just a pilgrimage, it was the grandest procession the world had ever seen. According to Arab chroniclers, his caravan stretched as far as the eye could see: 60,000 men, 12,000 slaves, and 100 camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of pure gold. There were soldiers, musicians, courtiers, and entire herds of animals for food. He wasn't just traveling. He was displaying the wealth of a continent as Musa's caravan crossed the Sahara. Tales spread like wildfire. When he arrived in Cairo, the city's merchants and rulers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Mansa Musa spent and gifted gold so generously that he caused something no economist could have predicted: inflation. Prices in Egypt skyrocketed. Gold became less valuable for nearly a decade because there was simply too much of it. Musa had done the impossible. He had made gold common. Imagine that, a single man's generosity destabilizing an entire regional economy. The modern equivalent would be a billionaire walking into Wall Street and flooding the market with so much cash that the dollar collapses. Historians wrote that Musa's spending spree left ripples across Africa and the Middle East for years, when he eventually realized the damage his generosity had caused. He tried to buy back some of the gold at high interest rates to restore balance. It was a lesson in how even good intentions, backed by limitless wealth, can reshape economies in unpredictable ways. But Mansa Musa's journey wasn't about showing off, not entirely. It was a statement of faith and power. On his way home from Mecca, he met scholars, poets, and architects, inviting them back to Mali. Among them was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, an Andalusian architect who would design the famous Jingareba Mosque in Timbuktu, a masterpiece of Sahelian architecture that still stands today. Musa brought back more than gold. He brought back ideas, and those ideas turned Mali into one of the greatest centers of learning in the medieval world. When Mansa Musa returned, he poured his fortune into building, under his reign, cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Niani flourished. Libraries, universities, and mosques rose from the desert sands. Timbuktu became known as the City of Books, a place where scholars from North Africa and the Middle East came to study philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and law. The Sankore University held tens of thousands of manuscripts, many of which still survive. Imagine, in an age when most of Europe could barely read, Mali was producing scholars, poets, and scientists. Musa's empire wasn't just rich in gold. It was rich in culture, trade, and intellect. Caravans carried salt, ivory, textiles, and slaves across the desert, linking Africa's wealth with markets in Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. The empire's organization was sophisticated, with appointed governors, tax systems, and laws rooted in Islamic justice. Mansa Musa managed to blend religion with governance and trade with education, creating one of the most stable and prosperous empires in African history. Yet, with all this glory came myth. The Arab historian Al-Umari, who recorded Musa's visit, described him as a man whose wealth was beyond comprehension. And even centuries later, economists still struggle to measure it. When modern analysts try to compare his fortune to today's billionaires, the numbers defy belief. Adjusted for inflation, estimates of his net worth range from $300 to $400 billion, more than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Rockefeller combined. But truthfully, his wealth may be impossible to quantify. He didn't own stocks or companies. He owned the land, the gold, and the trade routes that powered economies across continents in many ways. Mansa Musa's wealth was absolute. He didn't depend on markets. He was the market. His signature could shift trade, and his caravans could flood economies. But perhaps the most extraordinary part of his story is how he used that power. Unlike many rulers who hoard riches, Musa turned his into monuments of faith, education, and culture. His wealth built a civilization, one that stood as a beacon of African achievement long before European colonialism began rewriting history. Still, no empire lasts forever. After Mansa Musa's death around 1337, Mali remained wealthy but began to fracture under weaker rulers and external pressures. Trade routes shifted, new powers rose, and by the 15th century, Mali's dominance faded. The empire's golden age dimmed, but its legacy endured, in architecture, manuscripts, and memory, even as centuries passed. Mansa Musa's story lived on through Arab scholars, African griots, and later European explorers who could hardly believe such prosperity had once existed in the heart of Africa. It's a story that challenges our perception of history. For too long, narratives of wealth and power have centered on Europe and the West, while Africa's empires were dismissed or forgotten. Yet here was a ruler who outshined them all, not only in riches but in vision. Mansa Musa reminds us that Africa was not a passive continent waiting for discovery. It was a cradle of gold, intellect, and innovation long before colonialism dimmed its light. His story also carries a timeless lesson about the nature of wealth. True wealth isn't just the ability to spend or to own, it's the power to shape the world around you. Musa's gold could buy anything, but he chose to build universities and cities that would outlast him. His fortune wasn't in his vaults. It was in the minds he educated and the institutions he founded. That's why, even 700 years later, his name still carries weight, not because of how much he had, but because of what he did with it. And perhaps that's what makes his story so fascinating today. In an age obsessed with billionaires, net worth rankings, and digital wealth, Mansa Musa's story feels both ancient and familiar. He lived in a time when gold, not data, was the currency of power, but the principles remain the same. Control the resources, influence the trade, and shape the narrative, and you can rule the world. But unlike the quiet control of modern elites, Mansa Musa's power was visible, dazzling, and at times overwhelming. His pilgrimage turned him into a legend from Africa to Arabia to Europe. When cartographers in the 14th century drew maps of Africa, they placed a golden-robed king holding a gold nugget at the heart of the continent. That figure was Mansa Musa. He wasn't just a historical ruler. He became a symbol of Africa's untold wealth and potential, and yet, there's something poetic about his story. Despite all his gold, despite being the richest man who ever lived, the sands of time eventually swallowed his empire. The monuments eroded, the manuscripts scattered, and the trade routes moved elsewhere. What remained wasn't the gold, it was the story, the legend of a king who ruled with such abundance that he made the world tremble, and then used that fortune to enlighten his people today. When we talk about wealth, we often measure it in numbers, stock prices, or market caps. But Mansa Musa's story reminds us that true wealth lies in legacy. His riches vanished, but his vision of learning, faith, and civilization still echoes across time. His journey shows that prosperity without purpose fades, but wealth used for creation becomes history. Oh, the next time someone says the richest man ever was a tech mogul or oil tycoon, remember Mansa Musa, the king of Mali, whose gold flowed like rivers, whose generosity changed economies, and whose wisdom built a culture that outshone kingdoms from Cairo to Constantinople. He was more than the richest man who ever lived. He was a reminder that wealth, in the right hands, can become something greater than money. It can become civilization itself.